Hello, Mario here. I'm going to show you how to set up a scene in After Effects before doing your camera moves. The camera is an incredible storytelling tool. It can be used to build excitement or add tension or enhance the emotion of a scene. There are all kinds of reasons to move a camera. Just remember one rule: set up your scene first, do your camera move last. Set up your scene first, do your camera move last. Too many times I see people animating on a moving camera. Then when they want to change their camera move, it messes up the animation. The trick is to separate the scene from the camera. The first step in separating the camera is to never move it, or never even add it. Take your layout, or your rough layout, and animate on that. Even if you're animating outside of the camera, that's fine. Just never move the camera while you're animating. Even better, have the entire layout fit in the camera, and then again, never move that camera. Think of it like this. The layout, or rough layout, is the world for your character to live in. Animate the character in that world. When you are finished animating, then move the camera in that same world. In case you have a Toon Boom Harmony project with camera moves, but you still want to use After Effects, I can make another video to export that project without the camera moves so that you could do your camera moves in After Effects. During the semester, I demonstrated some animation with Walter, a character designed by Brooke Morgan. Great little character. Well, last week, I gave Walter a world to live in. Once his world was complete, I had the freedom of moving the camera wherever I wanted. It's not a great scene, but there's a lot of good learning in it. It was fun too. Like I usually say, if I can make these crappy assets look okay in a video, can you imagine what you can do with the amazing artwork that I see from you guys? Set up your scene first, do your camera moves last. Let's break that down a bit. Set up your scene first. What's in a scene? Well, there's a layout and some animation, right? Well, yeah, but there's actually a whole lot involved in those two items. The layout has all kinds of layers, underlays, overlays, a sky, a moon. Then we add the animation. Lighting on the animation, shadows. There could be shadows on the layout, there could be lighting on the layout. There could be some effects, fog, mist. There could be props. There could even be another character. So there's a lot of items in a scene, and all of them have to line up. So let's take a look at our scene with that same list that I just said. So here I am in After Effects, and that's the scene that you watched just a second ago. And before I even start breaking this down, I want you to notice that in this comp, or in this composite, there's actually no cameras. Now you did see in that video, I did a lot of camera moves, some handheld, some camera shakes, all kinds of stuff, even some eases. But when I look in my comp here, there's actually no camera. So this comp that I'm looking at is how I set my scene up first. So let's break this composite down. We have our main layer, which is our buildings. We have our underlay, which in my case is just the one building. And I separated that so it would parallax. And there's the overlay, the light posts, and the parking meters. And there's the lighting. And I'll actually be doing another video on how I did this lighting. There's the sidewalk. And there's the prop, which in my case was the truck. There's the animation, which in my case was Walter. And there's a sky. Now, in this particular scene, I actually didn't have a sky. It's a night scene, so I kept it dark. I could have probably put something in nicer, and I'm sure you guys would have. But there is a moon in this shot. And that is on its own layer as well. So as you can see, there's a lot of layers. And in fact, in this particular scene that you just watched, there's 23 layers. And again, there's no camera in this composite. So this is how I set my scene up first. Now that you have a good understanding of the rule, set up your scene first, do your camera moves last, I'm going to set up a new project using that exact rule. So I have a blank After Effects session here, and usually I create my composite first. But I'm going to stick with the rule. I'm going to create my scene first. So if I look in my folder, I have the buildings layer, I have the sidewalk, I have the street surface, the lights, the parking meter, the truck, the moon. So I can select all of these assets and drag them in to the project tab. What I didn't drag in is my animation. I have to import my animation. So to do that, we go File, Import, File, and we go to the frames directory of our animation. And I'm just going to grab the first frame. Make sure it says PNG sequence and import. Now when you import it, it sets up the frame rate to 30 frames per second. So we do have to change that. Right click, interpret footage, main, and we change that to 24 frames per second. And if you want to loop your animation, that's down below. Now that I have my layout layers imported and my animation imported, I'm ready to create my composite. Now normally I create a composite at 1920 by 1080, but when I set up the scene, I actually do it at the same resolution as my layout. And if I look at my layout, for example this building scene, the resolution is 8000 by 4500. I'm going to create a composite with that exact same resolution. And the way to do that is to right click that image and create a new comp from selection. Okay, so now I have a comp and you can see my ugly buildings. Yeah, ugly. It does name the comp the same as the image. So you see there's the image file and there's the comp. They're the same name. So I'm going to rename this comp. And I'm just going to call it comp1. Again, make sure it's 24 frames per second. Okay, so I have my ugly buildings. I have my underlay, which is that ugly building. And I have my street stuff, which is the light posts and the power lines. And I could drag in my prop, my truck. Put that roughly where it should be. That's pretty good. I'm going to move the light posts over, street stuff. So I'm just aligning this just a bit. I'm going to drag my animation in. Now he is a little bit big for this scene, so I'm going to resize him. And then put him in place. So I'm kind of roughly lining things up. And now I can bring in my road surface. And the only thing uglier than those buildings is my sidewalk. So let's bring that in. Whew, that's a bad one. Funny thing is, these are the exact same assets that I used in that video you saw. Or like I usually say, if I can make these crappy assets look okay in a video, can you imagine what you can do with the amazing artwork that I see from you guys? Alright, so now that everything's brought in, I am going to turn on 3D space for each layer. And this just lets the camera and the assets exist in 3D space. Basically, the most important thing is I could see it through the camera. And more importantly, I can actually set up some parallaxing, which I'll demonstrate shortly. But I actually never add a camera to this scene. This scene is what I call the character's world. This is the world we've created for this character. So we actually never add a camera to this comp. The way I do my camera moves last, I actually create a new comp to hold the camera. So new composition, and I'm going to set it up the same resolution as our camera, 1920 by 1080. These are numbers you guys are used to. 24 frames per second, and I have it for a minute 30. So this comp is completely blank, but what I do is I actually bring in comp 1 into comp 2. So here's comp 1, and there's comp 2. I'm going to drag comp 1 into my shot. And first we have to enable 3D space. Okay, don't forget that one. Okay. This transfers the 3D information from comp 1. So we put it in 3D space and we transfer the 3D information. That's what these two options are. I'm going to add a new camera. One node, 50 millimeter. Hit OK. And go to two views so we could see where our camera is. See, I can move this camera around and I can see all the assets, including those ugly buildings, and that ugly sidewalk, and that ugly truck. All right. So having this camera completely separate than this comp, I could do whatever I want with this camera and it'll never break that world. Everything's lined up in this world, in this comp. So I can make sure everything's lined up, and then when I go into here, I can move the camera wherever I want in that world and it'll never mess up comp 1. So right now, as you saw, I can move this camera around and there's no parallaxing or anything, nothing special. Okay, so let's turn on a bit of parallaxing. So I'm going to go back to comp 1 and I'm going to separate these assets in 3D space. So for example, the street we'll have to deal with last. Same with the sidewalk. So let's do the buildings first. Okay, so if I go back to comp 2 where the camera is and I move this, right now nothing's parallaxing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is in comp 1, I'm going to push that underlay, that building, the red building, I'm going to push it further back. And I'm going to take the buildings and push that a little back as well, but not as far. So here's the rest of the buildings. Push that back a bit. So that way we have 3 layers. We have most of the buildings, we have the red building, and at this stage we have the light posts and the character. And I'm going to pull the truck forward. I am going to pull it up a bit though. I think I'll put it over here. So again, we're setting up the entire world here. And I guess I could bring the moon in, put it in 3D space, and then the moon can go way back. Just like it would in real life. Way back. And I think I want that moon a little bit bigger. Okay. Now that we have all our layout layers separated in 3D space, when I go back to Comp 2 and move our camera, things will start to parallax, including the moon. Now I'm going to go back and do a neat little trick here. So the parallaxing is working. And if you remember, the sidewalk in the video certainly did not look as bad as it does here. Okay, if you remember the video, it looked a little bit better than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I used that sidewalk. We're using 3D space to separate things like they would be in real life. So for example, if the main buildings are here, and that red building's further back, that's this one here. Okay, that's the red building. So there's our main buildings, there's the red building, there's the moon way back there. Okay, and then moving forward, we have the character here. We also have the light posts there. And we have the truck moved up a bit forward. Okay, so we set these up as if they were in real life. The truck is closer to us than the light posts, and the light posts are closer than the buildings, and the buildings are closer than that red building, and the red building's closer than the moon. So you can see how I'm using 3D space to simulate real world. But going back to this ugly sidewalk, how did I get that sidewalk to work? Well, right now we're looking down at these assets, or looking down at this artwork. And that's because we're in the top view. I'm going to set it to a left view. Okay, so we're looking from the left side. We're no longer looking down. And I'm going to select the sidewalk. And I'm going to get this sidewalk to look like it would in real life. Now, if you think about a sidewalk, it's not straight up and down. It's flat. It's horizontal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it on the horizontal. Maybe a slight angle, but it's more flat than it would be normally. And I'm going to pull it down. And now suddenly, it'll start to behave like it would in real life. So let me just scale it a bit so that it touches that building. And in fact, I could go completely 90 degrees here. So here's rotation minus 90. So this is perfectly flat. This is exactly as it would be in real life. I gotta move the, I think I gotta move it down a bit. And I gotta move the light posts up because they're sticking out of the ground. So I'm gonna pull that on the Y. There we go. So let's go back to our camera in Comp 2. I guess I should adjust Walter. Poor Walter. Let's pull Walter and put him on the ground properly. I guess wet cement. All right. So now if I go back to Comp 2 and I move the camera, the sidewalk will parallax. See that? I'm using 3D space to my advantage to make crappy artwork look okay. Yeah, it's still crappy. Anyway, so I'm going to do the same with the street. Here's the street surface. And I'm going to rotate the street surface rotation X minus 90 degrees. And I'm just going to pull it up to match. And the poor truck now is buried. So let's fix the truck. So there you go. So now things are in 3D space, and they're going to start to behave like 3D space. Let's look in the camera, Comp 2, and I can now parallax. And both the street will parallax correctly and the sidewalk will parallax correctly. The light posts parallax. And remember, I put Walter and the street posts at the same level, right? They're both, let's see, let's go back. There's Walter. Let's look back down again, straight down, top. Okay, so here's Walter, right here. And here's the street stuff, which are those light posts. They're together. Okay, see that? So that means that when everything's parallaxing, these two will line up. These two will always stick together. So when I parallax, when I move that camera, Walter will never slide away from the light posts. So you see, I've created a whole scene, a whole world for Walter to live in. That comp is huge. And I've lined everything up. I've set it up like it would be in real life. So I separated it in 3D space. I even did some interesting stuff with the sidewalk and the road. Now I can go into Comp 2 and do some pretty interesting camera moves and not worry about things not lining up because it's already been all lined up in here. The only time things won't line up is if you didn't separate things correctly in 3D space. So think about where things are in proportion to each other. So exactly like I did for Walter and the streetlights, that all lined up. Personally, I think Walter's still too big. But you see, the nice thing is I can adjust this stuff and it won't even mess up my camera move. There, mini Walter. Right. Too much fun. Okay, so now when I want to key my camera, I just go to Comp 2, and turn on keys for position.